Welcome to Financially Legal, the podcast of inspiration and tactical advice for the small, entrepreneurial, mission-driven, consumer-facing lawyer. I'm Dan Lear. Judie Saunders has built an agile, technology-driven firm to fight abusive systems and institutions. Stay tuned to find out how she advocates for elite child athletes and their families, as well as criminal defendants, while building a modern-day law firm. Judie Saunders is an inspiration. As the leader of the law offices of Judie Saunders, Judie fights for elite athletes, often children, who have survived abuse at the hands of coaches or others in positions of authority. Just as we saw in the sexual abuse scandal involving USA Gymnastics, abusers groom and manipulate parents just as they groom and manipulate athletes, and they leverage powerful, calcified, often unjust institutions in order to perpetrate their abuse. Judie sees similar patterns in the criminal justice system. Criminal defendants, particularly those of color, face a system that is balanced against them almost from the jump. Judie is working to right these wrongs. In this episode, Judie and I discuss the overlap between these similarly disparate systems, how parents as well as children are groomed by abusers in elite sport systems, how sexual abuse is the best known type of abuse we see in these systems, but is in many ways the end result of years of emotional and verbal abuse. We also discuss the extreme imbalance that families of elite athletes who are also families of color face in the world of elite athletics. We discuss the economic viability of a practice fighting these systemic imbalances and how other attorneys can get involved. And we discuss how Judie uses technology to get the word out. In her words, to start the conversation and keep it going, and how she's using tech to show compassion to her prospective and existing clients. It's a wonderful conversation. Now, on with the show. And I'm here with Judie Saunders. Judie, thank you so much for joining us on Financially Legal.
Thank you for having me, Dan. Excited to be here.
So I've already given folks a bit of an intro about you, but why don't you, in your own words, kind of tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do and your practice. And obviously that's what we're going to talk about, but, kind of give them the bio in your own words, because I always find that's way better than any stab that I could take at doing that.
Absolutely. So you said before, so full name Judie Saunders, and I am an attorney. I represent families, competitive athletes who are seeking to hold coaches accountable as a result of sexual, physical, or psychological, emotional, verbal abuse. I also represent clients who in a criminal defense capacity. And a lot of those cases take the shape of if you've had a police interaction due to an automobile stop, a Fourth Amendment, there's some type of allegations that your rights have been violated with an illegal search or seizure. And by that, I mean, your Fourth Amendment constitutional rights have been violated. That's been my practice in the area of focus. I've been working in New York, mostly, and New Jersey for several years, almost 2 decades. I can't believe it's flown by. And in particular, I'd say within the last couple of years, I've really been focusing, although I work in both of those areas, I've really been focusing on kind of the parallels and the patterns that I'm seeing in the institutional and the systemic just breaks in our systems, in our institutional systems. And have been seeing from working, one of the benefits from having some years and miles behind you and on your resume is that you start to notice patterns. You start to notice inconsistencies that are popping up. And by that, I mean, not only when we're talking about what's going wrong and what has been gone wrong, or maybe what was always wrong with the criminal justice system, I see the same thing in the institutionalized competitive youth sports arenas, and no pun intended on arena, but I'm seeing those same type of issues and problems. And so that's what I've been working with competitive youth athletes and their families to try to bring awareness. There has been tons of amazing athletes and also activists, attorneys who have been working in this area for years. And so I I consider myself lucky to be able to add to those chorus of individuals who are talking about the abusive practices that are really tainting our kids and ruining another generation of athletes. And so that's what I've been working on.
And how did this, I mean, this is obviously a very interesting and unique practice area. How did you sort of come to this? Were you doing the criminal work first and then kind of have this develop, or was it the other way around? Because I think you did a really nice job of tying those together, but they wouldn't seem to be connected, at least initially. So I'm curious how you found your way to this type of a practice.
Sure. I found my way to this area, I think, in a similar fashion that a lot of people come to their life work. We're taught early on, at least I was taught early on, have a purpose, get an education, strive hard, work hard, find that thing that lights you up. And also a lot of times rather, you can get down because you're not feeling that spark. Um, what happened in my case, however, and like I was saying, and I think a lot of people, you often back into the work that you were meant to do because of listening, because of observations. So it so happened, my story goes, I didn't go directly to law school. I started out working on Capitol Hill in politics, starting out as an intern first, and then working on campaigns, working at the Democratic National Committee there in Washington, working in areas that really, I would say at that point, were just interesting. It was wonderful to be there. I got there in the 90s, right on the heels of Anita Hill. So there was always that internal spark to look for and to be attracted to causes that had a direct impact on people, had a direct impact on policy. So I started off kind of doing that. And that kind of just was maybe the beginning of the breadcrumbs being dropped about what I was supposed to do. And then left politics to fulfill what I'd say was maybe a parent or family dream of, having a lawyer in the family, going to law school. After law school, I worked directly with children, prosecuting the crimes against children. So the rape, homicides, abuse, and neglect of children. That was very taxing. It was very emotional. That was very, very hard work. I went from there to, again, so some more breadcrumbs were dropped. I was dealing directly with children. Went from there to work with New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg's office on legislation. So these all tied, kind of were leading up to what I think was this moment where I am again, it's circled back around almost completely to work with children, to work with young competitive athletes. And that just really took, how did I get there? Really took me finally, I'd say within the last 3 to 5 years of my professional practice, to really start to listen and really start to see what has been pushed. What are you being pushed toward, Judy? And I'd say that it's exactly this area, um, addressing the needs of children and families who are being silenced because of abuse. So that's a long way to the, to say that I believe that I was led to this over the years of having gone in and out of dealing in this practice area, advocating for children, and then finally slowing down within the 5 years when you kind of start to get in your, once you've been doing anything for a while, you start to question, well, what am I enjoying this? What should I really be doing? And then it's at that point that I started to kind of slow down and look around and see what exactly am I being pointed toward, and it was this work. I hope that answers the question. I hope
No,
I
that was
wasn't.
great. And it actually brought up a couple of additional questions that I wanted to ask you. So I know that that you're a parent.
Yes.
And you just mentioned this, but I was hoping to draw it out a little bit. You mentioned that uh, it's not just often these athletes that are, as you I think have said, groomed for to be manipulated, but it's often the families and the parents too. And I think you had mentioned to me that being a parent has also informed your desire and your um, kind of drive and ability really to do this kind of work. And I was hoping you could speak to that a little bit.
Absolutely. I remember, if I could start with a story, I remember that when I was first started practicing and was working in a unit called Crimes Against Children. At that point, I was young. I was in New York City. No children didn't have the ties, didn't have kind of that thinking. I remember dealing with several survivors, several children who had gone through abuse. And as a human first, there was, of course, that empathy that I had for the children that would come into my office and telling me just a parade of horribles. And then it was also my duty as an attorney, it was my duty representing the state to try to hold these individuals accountable that had harmed them. I look back on those experiences now as a mother, and I know that maybe some of the decisions that I would have made, maybe some of the way that I would approach the practice at that time early on in my career would have definitely been different. Now, fast forward now 20 years, I have a 16-year-old son and a 13-year-old son. And the way that I practice now is entirely different. I've had experiences myself with my own children. They are very active. They are not themselves in any highly intense competitive sports, but they are very active surfers, snowboarders. They were in soccer. And so that informs and allows me to have a more expansive view as I approach these cases. When we speak specifically about grooming, how is it that a child, how is it that a parent, and these are highly, I'm using that, I feel like I'm overusing that word. Let me look for another word. These are very involved parents,
Mm.
very intelligent parents. Um, and what we see is that we find that not only do you find the athlete that has encountered this abuse, but many times if you don't really have an understanding, there could be a default to blame the parent. Well, how was it that the parent didn't know? Well, weren't you picking up your child every night? Aren't you close with your child? There's that need to blame. But I know from being a parent and having been involved in the machine of competitive youth sports, which, by the way, at the most recent reports, is over $17 billion revenue generating industry. So
Mm.
there is built in with that factors that can lead to vulnerability, lead to abuse. And specifically, when you talk about grooming when it's perfected, it is really an art of manipulating and a betrayal of trust that not only happens with a child that's talented, skilled, and driven, but also by that parent. And that happens because the coach, the sporting institution, they present themselves to the parent, to the entire family as the expert. You and I both know that the whole label of expert, it it allows for a platform for the individual to stand above, to speak out. When I present myself to be an attorney, it gives you almost a kind of a opening, a door to say to individuals, trust me, or begin with a trust, begin with a benefit of the doubt. And that's what this grooming process is. It begins the parent, regardless of how achieved they are in their personal or professional life, when they're entering that field, entering that gym, they are already beginning with a disadvantage of meeting the coach, entering this sport, and they're not the expert in that area. And that, if you have a coach or an individual, and of course, I put the footnote and disclaimer, I personally know hundreds of
Hmm.
positive coaching experiences that athletes have had. But of course, we're talking about the individual that's going to use that benefit of the doubt, use that trust to begin the abusive process and to begin that whole cycle of grooming that involves both the child and the parent.
Oh, that's such a challenge. And I can't, this is less relevant, but I can't help but mention this just personally. I have a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old boy. I also have a 10-year-old. And it sounds like we have very similar interests because mine play a lot of soccer and also love skiing. So
Yes.
it is so interesting. And as it's so interesting you mentioned that $17 billion. I totally get it because we spend way too much money on that
Oh,
stuff. But
yeah.
B, it has, and I remember my parents even saying when I was growing up, like, wow, it's different than it used to be, these types of sports. And it's become even more complex. Like, we've kind of focused on soccer because that's the sport that I think our kids have been drawn to. And also it was like, well, we can't do more than one because there's just no time. But like I remember, kind of briefly interacting with the basketball ecosystem. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is a whole nother totally complex system that, I could never figure out really how to navigate without some guidance. And it's interesting to me that, yeah, like you say, on the one hand, maybe we do think about these parents that push too hard or want too much or give too much up for their kids. Um, but it is also truly, it is a system with, a lot of complexity, needed or unneeded, and with, yeah, just with a lot of kind of interesting nuance that makes it really challenging for a parent to navigate. And you want the best for your kids, particularly if you have a kid who's very talented. You want that child to succeed, and we have, for good or for bad, the luxury to enable kids to do these kinds of things at a high level. So anyway, I think it's so fascinating as a parent to be thinking through some of these things.
Yeah, and what you're hitting exactly on the tension that parents find themselves in. So compound what you were saying, we have the luxury of supporting a child that is exhibiting both. They have the commitment, they have the passion, they have
Yeah.
the curiosity. Compound on that, when you're talking about, let's pick basketball, the ecosystem of basketball, the way that they are funded and the way that it's established, you're right. You don't have the time anymore to do more than one sport. It's become so complex. I remember thinking, I don't think that actually having this thought when my boys were, when you're first starting out, and it's usually, when you're a new parent, the kids are just entering, they're out of kindergarten and they start doing the clinics. And
Yep.
once you start getting into the leagues and the year round and the travel, actually said to myself, I don't think that I can work anymore. I actually, you're pulling out spreadsheets, and there were parents, I readily admit, there is one
Yeah.
mom, God bless her, and she knows who she is. I was constantly relying on her for her to
Mm.
tell me where my kids needed to be on this
Yeah.
weekend or that weekend in this travel. It is a full-time job. Now combine that. Let's if we focus on just, the child who seems to be um, advancing, they
Right.
have the skill, they have the talent. This is usually how the scenario goes. They're then spotted by a coach who says, your child is it. Your child you should focus on the private lessons. You should focus on, and this happened actually personally in my case, you should focus on really getting this child to the next level. And
Yep.
then that's a whole nother avenue, a whole nother road that you start to go down. And it spirals into one beyond the other. And before you know it, you get to the point where if and only if you have a coach that's prone to abuse, they'll meet you at the intersection of skill, talent, and that's when you become vulnerable. The child becomes vulnerable and the parent becomes vulnerable. They're being told that their child is special, and of course, every parent, you and I both know that our kids are special.
Oh yeah, no,
um,
of course, yep,
but
yep,
now
yep.
they're being recognized by a coach, and that leads to that vulnerability, and that leads to that, the different scenarios that you have, whether it's physical, whether it's verbal. You're wondering, is this coach crossing the line? Is this just the tension of now, the
Yeah,
stress of a sport? We're no longer talking about, just the recreational game. We're talking about the really drilled down, focus, competing at national and maybe even international levels. So that's what we're talking about. So yeah, there are complexities, and by the time a family ends up in my office, they've been blindsided. Yes, the
yeah,
fog is starting to lift because the pain of seeing your child suffer those injuries, that result from the abuse, that is giving you the biggest wake up call. And by that time, you're so riddled with the guilt, you can't believe that you didn't see things. And then there's also the blame. So yeah, there's complexities, and it's really fascinating. And like I said at the top when we were talking, I just feel so fortunate to interact with these individuals and to help these families. They change my life with every client.
I love that. So I want to ask what may be considered I don't know, a a kind of, I can't think of a better word. I can't be more articulate than kind of a little gross, but like I don't mean it that way either. Listeners, don't freak out. But um, but I think it's relevant, particularly our podcast is financially legal, and we often think about the finance and economics of law, and unfortunately, part of the reason that lawyers exist, both civil and criminal lawyers, is that sometimes bad things happen in the world, and there has to be a way for those to be reconciled. Um, and so I feel a little uncomfortable asking this question, but I think it's important to sort of think about these things. Like, is this a booming market? Again, that sounds so callous, and I don't mean it that way, but I do want to understand, like, you know, what this looks like as a business model,
Hmm.
because for two reasons. One is, we had a really interesting conversation, and I'll kind of point people back to this. I had a really interesting conversation last summer with two civil rights attorneys about kind of the economics of representing marginalized populations.
Hmm.
And I found that incredibly enlightening about the kinds of incentives that our system has created, or not created in some cases, to provide for representation for these folks. And I think that's really important, because like lawyers got to eat too,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
we're all making economic decisions about, doing, like, for example, the work you're doing, versus, going to work for some larger firm that does work for Fortune 500 companies and can easily put bread on the table. And so I think it's important, both from the, from a societal perspective, to think through these questions, and also from like a personal economic perspective. So, how does this work, or does this work as a business,
Mhm.
and what kind, and again, like, I think another interesting question in here is this one of these things that's happening far more often than any of us understand or would perceive? And,
Mhm.
is there opportunity for other people to start doing the type of work that you're doing, and help to right these wrongs? So, and again, we'll talk about the criminal law work too, but even kind of drilling down further on the abuse that you see with children and parents, like, how has that played out for you, and kind of on that side of the firm?
Sure. Thank you for that question. Um, 2 days ago,
Yeah, and
and
hopefully, again, it doesn't seem.
no,
Again,
no, 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 no.
maybe the lead up was made it sound worse than the question, but I think these are important issues to think through.
They're important issues to think through as a business owner, as a small law firm owner,
Yeah,
as a minority female,
yeah,
entrepreneur. That question is top of mind. And 2 days ago, arrived in the office, and I should say last week, because on Fridays I do all the financials, look at the book, and I was put my head down and said, "Oh." So if that can kind of give you a glimpse into, is the work that I'm doing lucrative? I would answer it by saying a lot of the cases, and for whatever universe, call whatever reason rather, call it the universe calling me, telling me to work here. I'd answer the question by saying, when we think about abuse, the mind, the media, we usually think of sexual abuse. Sexual abuse carries the traditional, you
Right.
know,
It's the
horror.
one that we hear the
Yes,
most media about, and yeah.
exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. And, there is definitely the market for that. There's attorneys that specialize and work with that. I work with that. And that's usually the one that you would think of being a little more, if we use that word, there's definitely a call, there's a more lucrative, there's settlements in that area.
Hmm.
What I am finding, and this is my activist, bone in my body, the issues that lead up to, in my opinion, and allow for the sexual abuse is laid by the emotional and verbal abuse.
Hmm.
Larry Nasser, who, for whatever reason, and sometimes I don't even like to say his name, he topped the scandal with USAG, with our gymnastics young ladies, with the sexual abuse. In what did he plead guilty in 2018? Now I don't even know,
Right.
but he is known for sexually abusing over 300. Who knows if the number, um, gymnast, some of the best known Olympians included among the survivors of Larry Nasser. But the thing about Larry Nasser that was interesting, and the way that he managed to groom and to have access and opportunity to these young ladies, it's because we have set up a system whereby it's acceptable for verbal and the physical and emotional abuse. Larry Nasser would then be it at our national training camps in Texas, the famous Caroli training camps in Texas. He would then present himself as the good cop, so to speak, and I use that in quotes. We know sometimes of
Mm.
the good cop, bad cop. Come, get away from that mean coach. Come with me. Come in my office. He offered them kind of a respite, a place to, be relieved from the brutality of the training and the degrading, the bullying, and the humiliation. So it was that emotional abuse that
Mm.
allowed for Larry Nasser to then groom and to bring these girls in and to fool them and to let them think. And so I'm using that as a point to say that what I like to concentrate on, not only the sexual abuse, is I like to concentrate on the emotional and the physical, that verbal abuse, that humiliation, those wounds that stay with you for years. And that area of the law, the emotional, and usually it would show up in a complaint sound with under the name, intentional infliction of emotional distress or negligent infliction of emotional distress. Those types of claims are harder to prove in a court. We're not used to them. We have a history in our jurisprudence and in our law of kind of, and in our culture, suck it
Yeah.
up, toughen up.
Yep.
The law also echoed that same sentiment. And I am really working hard to try to get these cases to be recognized and try to show that these injuries, the emotional injuries, are equally, they are just as bad as the sexual ones. I'm thinking of a young lady who is a survivor, not was, is a survivor of Larry Nassar, and said that, it is also the emotional injuries that she remembers that are just as poignant, just as hurtful as the sexual abuse she suffered. So that area of the law is a lot harder. I would say that it's not as lucrative as, say, the sexual abuse, but just as damaging and needs to be paid attention to. So, also in answering the question, is there room for other practitioners? Absolutely. In focusing on bringing awareness to, we have to, I think, attack this from all sides, continue to bring cases, and with the cases, bring awareness. People, lawyers, why are we here? What do we do? Well, of course, I'm going to speak, favorably for attorneys, but really at the heart, when lawyers are doing their job, we are bringing awareness. We're telling individuals, we're reminding individuals of where the line is that should not be crossed. And that's part of the work that I'm doing. Fine. I love sports, athleticism, just like and in my head, I'm an athlete. What I do, 5 or 6 days a week for an hour in the gym. What I don't want to see is the continual crossing of the line and our kids being harmed, our kids being hurt. So it's bringing an awareness on both sides, on the coaching side, on the parenting side, and also to allow these kids to be able to feel like they can speak up. So normalize that. We normalize when the emotional abuse happens. We normalize the athlete being able to say, "Hey, this happened. This was said to me," versus what's going on now. The emotional abuse happens. The child internalizes it. The child doesn't say anything. The parent doesn't know, and then you have kind of the snowball effect of the abuse.
Yeah. Wow. What a great answer. I am glad I asked that question.
Yeah.
Just a quick observation. It strikes me almost a little bit, and I don't know if this is a bad analogy or not, but you know, I've been talking a lot recently just about sort of how lawyers can get into more of a kind of proactive, almost consultative role. And one of the reasons for doing that is to try to provide strategic advice to clients before things get too bad. Because cleaning them up once they get bad is way more expensive than, it's the old, whatever, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure
Yes.
type of situation. And it's just interesting to think about that from a societal perspective, right? If we can recognize not just these big catastrophic situations of abuse, but the incremental abuse that ultimately leads to that, and call it out and stop it, maybe we don't end up with these more catastrophic, just horrible cases of broad systemic abuse. So I don't know. That was just my thought.
No, Dan, what you're bringing up is a great point. I firmly believe, and I am implementing exactly what you're talking about in my practice by offering legal coaching. And by that, I mean, you, especially in the nature of when individuals come with sexual abuse, with physical abuse in the sporting atmosphere, it is a tough, very complex place that families find themselves in. Let me give you an example. You have a child that has now risen to maybe the top of their sport, be it in swimming, be it in, skating, whatever it is. And now, so picture the family now, they've invested. Sometimes the children are sent to live with a host family because they're training out of state.
Yeah.
The family's invested tons of money. Whoever it is, the mother or the father, they maybe have sacrificed or given up their career to manage and to help. And then you start to learn, or you're trying to figure out, there's an abusive situation going on. These communities, whatever sporting activity is, are so small, are so close. You live in a bubble. There's only a certain amount of coaches that work at, the very high level, elite level. And then there becomes the worry. If we speak out or if we pull out from this coach, what are going to be the immediate, there'll be several different waves of repercussions that may fan out. You have the fear. What will happen if I speak out? Will I be isolated from the community? Your community, when you start working and you start practicing and training at these levels, it then becomes just the families at that level that you're dealing with on a daily basis.
Yeah. Those
Some
are all
of
your
the
friends. That's your social group.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So, many of these athletes are homeschooled, so
Yep.
they're not in, the traditional
Yep.
schooling system with different friends. And you come and you sit down and you talk, and a lot of times the answer is not to file immediately a lawsuit or to start taking aggressive actions. So with legal coaching, we sit down, I give the lay of the land, I let them know
Mm.
what the laws are, I let them know, because of my experience, what I've seen happen, in this type of case. And it really can be preventative in a sense that, let's sit down, let's talk about the process. And even before, even if you start to even suspect that maybe there's a crossing of the line, maybe it hasn't risen to the level of even where the law would recognize it. At that step, you can step in and be more preventative. Counselors and practitioners can do that. It's very similar to the turn that we saw in the medical in health, where
Hmm.
we started to look more from a preventative aspect rather than just going in and always trying to cure a disease. So that's one thing that I'm doing actively, both on the abuse side in my practice and also in the criminal side in my practice.
I love it. So yeah, that was actually what I was going to say. So I wanted to just maybe step back, and I know when I looked at your website, I sort of saw this, survivors of abuse and criminal defense, and I didn't necessarily see. In fact, in some ways, I thought they seem very much in conflict. And you did a really nice job at the top of sort of saying kind of how in your mind those are tied together. But I'd love for you to just tease that out and talk just a little bit about your criminal practice and how you do see the overlap between the work that you do, on the survivors with survivors of abuse, and also on the criminal law side.
Sure. I have a first love, and I was trained in the courts in New York City in criminal litigation. So that is something that is very near to my heart. I spend at least um, 3 to 5 hours each week in pro bono work for individuals post conviction. I work with a local council in Alabama for a gentleman by the name of Andre Wallace, who has been imprisoned in Alabama since the early 70s, on when he was 15 years old. So that the criminal practice, and I know it appears though, the two services may not seem to be consistent, but that's very near to my heart. And that's something that I am very comfortable in representing individuals with, and something that I see the synergy. I see that the two cross paths and that I can be effective and give a client value, because when I look at the structure that holds the criminal justice system, that attempts to, extract justice and hold individuals accountable, when I look at that structure, and then when I go and I look at the structure of organized competitive youth sports, I see definite parallels.
Hmm.
And the parallels, the patterns that I see are structures that are extracting, and money is being drawn out, money is being, um, how do I say it? Money is being made, revenue is being generated in very broken and corrupt ways in both systems. they started out competitive youth sports, criminal justice system, and I can't even really say they started out, with both lofty ideals, because we know in our country that the criminal justice system was an outgrowth of slavery, the enslavement of Africans. So, and that's a whole nother conversation. But the idea behind the criminal justice system is accountability, rehabilitation. And when I take that, and then when I look also and I analogize that to our competitive youth sports, they also have lofty goals. Now, the problem in both systems come in where we have the abuse, where we have different um, factors of shame that are injected into both systems, and where we have individuals that are broken, and then we have a culture and a community that refuses to look at where these breaks are. They pretend that they're not happening, and that's kind of where I see that they're on parallel tracks, both the criminal justice system and the structure that holds our competitive youth sports. And both are right for individuals who have bad intentions to take advantage of vulnerable populations. We know in our country that the criminal justice system, unfortunately, has preyed on Black bodies. And for reasons, again, that we can talk about on a different show, um, African Americans have been situated and positioned so that economically, and educationally, they're disadvantaged and they can be vulnerable in those areas. They can be. Again, similarly, I see a parallel where we take our competitive youth athletes, and you have these lofty ideas of what the goals may be, but then because we refuse to see some of the vulnerabilities in that structure, you have individuals who will take advantage, harm people, and there is an absolute failure for our community, for people in the positions of power, policy to make change, to really look at these structures and to recreate them and reimagine them. So, take for example, when we look in particular at the structure of competitive youth sports, after the scandal, after the abuse by Larry Nassar and United States Gymnastics, Congress created the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. The intent and purpose of that center and that initiative was to immediately start to investigate sexual abuse and bring about change, athlete safety, and that's similar. So that reaction to a scandal happening, we see that also happening in the structure and the
Yeah.
institution in criminal justice. There's a scandal, there's something that happens, there's abuse, and then there's some type of act or initiative or committee that's formed. Going back to the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, it was created but never properly funded. So you have, again, a failure on the criminal justice, a failure in the structures that we see in competitive youth sports, for there to be reactions without funding, without real political will. And that's why, going back to your earlier question, that's why there are lawyers. That's why there's room for lawyers to be here and to try to hold both perpetrators who are committing these acts, and also to hold our culture accountable and make them aware that, yes, you may be horrified for 5 minutes when a story breaks on an abuse of an athlete, sexual or physical abuse of an athlete. But what are we really going to do to prevent this in the future? Are we going to continue to react and create a commission or create a safe sport center and not fund them? I think the number goes in with it when the U.S. Center for Safe Sport was created in 2017. I think their and I may be, these are just approximate. They were getting approximately 200 calls a day within 3 months, or in a short period of time. That number almost tripled. And they were understaffed, no investigators, no attorneys. So how are we really going
Mm.
to address that? And it's the same questions. We're asking the same questions. We're hearing the same complaints coming out of the broken criminal justice system. So although my practice areas, they may not seem consistent, I see patterns. I see issues that really I can apply my experience in both areas, apply my advocacy, and really that these are the things that keep me up at night. If you're wondering what's keeping Judie Saunders up at night, it's no longer, my kids are too old, they're going to sleep, or either they're sneaking and playing Xbox too long. But what keeps me up at night is how to address these two broken systems where we both have vulnerable populations can be um, that can be abused by individuals, and how do we prevent it going forward?
Yeah, and you've already said this twice, and I don't, at the risk of sort of repeating it, this could be a whole nother podcast. But the other thing that strikes me too is the intersection of these. Often, a lot of the athletes that are, privileged or lucky enough to be able to excel in some of these sports at a high level, often they come from affluent families. But we know that there are also those who come from less affluent families, and um, from minority populations.
Hmm.
And again, I'm sure you have a way better window on this, both given your background, but also the work that you do. But I can't imagine how difficult it would be for a child of in a black or brown family who finds themselves in one of these athletic systems where their child is being sort of pulled out as a prodigy, and they may not even have the resources to be there to supervise the child. And again,
Yeah,
I know this is a whole nother podcast, but it just
I know.
strikes me that the overlap, right,
I
of
know.
the work that you're doing could be there's a whole nother kind of systemic and interesting conversation to be had there.
You really, that is almost a direct intersection, that point that you just brought up, with individuals who may not come from such a lucrative background, where you don't have the privilege of having one parent that doesn't work. For a time in
Yeah.
my career, I had the ability to focus almost exclusively on the kids. That is rare. That's rare in a black or brown family. My kids did have that privilege, but you're absolutely right. So to then think about that, mom or dad, or if you have one parent in the home, you're being sent to, to an athletic, sporting to a sport, and you're working in that sport, you're excelling. I mean, how many times the New York Times reported, it was maybe the abuse happened several years ago. The abuse took place maybe in the 80s, but now the young men are just now speaking out. It had to do with a basketball league in the Upper West Side in New York
Mm-hmm.
City. And it was that type of vulnerability, these highly skilled young men, 13 and 14-year-olds, who were excelling. And this was their opportunity to being able to get a college scholarship. And children know that. Children know early on what is at stake. And make no mistake about it, they know that this could be the opportunity for myself and my family. And that's another reason why children don't disclose, children don't
Right.
outcry, they don't talk about the abuse. So yes, that's a definite intersection. And I also see, again, they're vulnerable. The vulnerable populations, the breaks in these two systems. So that is an intersection that I find to be very distressing.
All right, for another time. I do want to spend our last few minutes together. I know one of the things that you're really passionate about as well is, and again, turning to a lighter and less weighty matter, but also hopefully one that's kind of a bit of a break. I know you're really passionate about kind of how you run your firm and how you think about running your firm, and maybe actually this is a nice transition, because I'm sure that so many of the people that you deal with are, find themselves in distress. So, I know you're really passionate about making your firm user friendly, agile. So I'd love for the last few minutes we have to talk about how you're using these tools in your practice, and maybe even how it relates to the particular client base that you're serving.
Yeah.
And kind of how that journey has been and is going.
Yes. So I am laser focused on just what you said, being agile, being responsive. COVID-19, this pandemic has forced all of us to rethink the way that we run our practice. One of the benefits of being a small or boutique law firm is that you can make these changes and embrace them. And that's exactly what I've done. I am living on the thought and the purpose, the strategy of how can I really interact with my clients, my prospective clients online. How can we start a discussion, a relationship online? I have the podcast that I have, which I truly enjoy. That's one of the ways I interact with my clients, the Child Athlete Abuse Podcast. I also think about what tools, what software. That's how I found you all. I listened to podcasts nonstop, using Gravity Legal, which is a software for lawyers, for practitioners. Using that, really, what I don't want to do, and what I know what most firms of any size don't want to do. You don't want to spend your time on processes that keep you stuck, that keep you doing the administrative work. So what I've really focused on in 2019, the beginning of this quarter also, are, working with Gravity Legal, working with, cloud-based software, trying to think, how can I get my message out? How can I really interact? I've been recently, I'd say within the last month or so, actually even learning about this new social media platform, Clubhouse, seeing if that's
Mm.
something that is, would work for my clients, and the way that we interact with each other. It's really rethinking how a law firm can exist. Lawyers, we are highly regulated. I know that. I understand that. I have to constantly stay on top of continuing education courses on, we're regulated in how we can even reach out to clients, how we can advertise. So we have to walk a fine line. But what I don't want to do is that I don't want to be stuck in that, traditionally when you see on TV or you think of a law firm, you think of, the fancy libraries with, the receptionist out front, and it's really stuffy. Quite to the contrary. I want to be seen, and I want to be that really flexible, approachable lawyer and attorney. I that's the way I feel. I feel approachable. I want to put out information, and we use that buzzword content. But what content really means to me is, how can I have an ongoing conversation? And when I say ongoing conversation, I mean it sincerely, that I learn just as much from my clients as I teach them and as I give to them. And so it's an ongoing conversation. So that's really what fuels my passion to remain agile, to look for software, to look for tools, um, to really keep the conversation going. So that's really how I'm looking to present to clients. Some of the things that I'm planning for during this quarter and for the second quarter is, how can I serve individuals who have been charged with crimes? I am looking at different models of either a subscription based so individuals can have access to justice. I learned from your podcast and I connected with, I think it's 1-400, which is a consultant firm that helps individuals plan, think about, and build out a subscription model for their service-based business. So that's something I'm looking into. It has always been, and it is really perplexing for practitioners who deal with criminal law on how do you provide that service to an individual who is facing the scariest. And some, I've had some situations. I mean, nothing is more traumatizing to the individual and to their family as being under indictment, being charged with a crime. It affects every part of your life. It could mean job loss. It could mean the removal of your kids. It could mean a mark on your record forever that could then put you outside, big scarlet letter, put you outside of community and family. But the problem is that if an individual can get quality representation from the moment they have that interaction, and I'm starting those conversations. This is a part of the firm that I'm in. How do I see myself as agile? I want to start the conversation before you have that interaction with the police, that pre arrest knowledge that you have. I want to give you access to an attorney before you start to make statements, before you're indicted. How do you do that? Not only are families dealing with, and these are families who, for the most part, are Black and Brown individuals, some who don't have that 10, 20, 30, 40, $50,000 to drop down. But how do you give that person access to justice? And that's what my firm is tackling when we talk about preventive, when I'm thinking about how do I look at this problem of access to justice, being agile, being new, being technology forward thinking. How do I do that? So that's what I'm tackling, and that's the way I see my firm. I see my firm as preventative, in the way that I practice law, technology savvy. I'm always looking, I'm always learning, and I'm always trying to keep the conversation going between myself, new and prospective clients.
That's awesome. Yeah, Judie, you're you're an inspiration. That was amazing. That was great.
I hope I
Thank
didn't.
you.
Attorneys have a. We've been taught to ramble and not
Nope.
be too direct. So I hope I answered that question.
That was perfect. Listen, I think that's kind of a great note to end on. I just wanted to give you kind of one final moment. You mentioned it quickly, but if there's folks who want to follow your mission, if they want to keep up with you, if they want to engage with you in that dialogue, you mentioned your podcast. Just anything else that you'd leave our audience with as we're closing up here.
Sure. I keep the conversation going with me. You can visit my website. I try to post and put new information dealing with, for survivors, some of the top of the issues for survivors. They have to deal with fear. Athletes have to think about retaliation. I tackle those issues. I look at them both legally and I look at them from different lens, and I talk about them. So you can visit my website at jsaunderslawfirm.com. If you or your family member are dealing with criminal charges, on my website also, I have what I call flashcards. It's a downloadable flashcard. You print it out, you cut it, keep it with you in your car, for reminders of your rights. Again, that's on my website. Go over to any of the platforms, Apple, Spotify, for my podcast. It's Legally Brief, and it presents the Child Athlete Abuse podcast. And then connect with me on Instagram. I love Instagram, and I'm also on Facebook. And yeah, just keep the conversation going. Visit my website, reach out to me. I'll also, leave the office number. Sometimes individuals are not sure. The conversations you have are confidential. So if you want to reach out, it's 212-709-8141.
Awesome. This has been great, Judy.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
You're an inspiration.
Thank you so much, Dan.
Financially Legal is brought to you by Gravity Legal. Gravity Legal is the customer-centric, technology-forward, payments and trust account management platform for lawyers and law firms. We help firms accelerate their growth by accepting electronic payments via debit, credit, or electronic check, integrating payments into their existing systems and workflows, and reducing the cost of payments with integrated e-check and our unique surcharging technology. To learn more about Gravity Legal, go to gravity-legal.com. Finally, if you like the content on Financially Legal, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. You can also go to gravity-legal.com/financiallylegal, find Get the Latest from Financially Legal on the right-hand side of the page, enter your email, and we'll keep you updated on Financially Legal and Gravity Legal on the regular.